It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that felt too ordinary to remember until I met her. The library was almost empty, save for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint rustle of pages. I was shelving returned books in the corner near the reading lounge, half listening to the clock tick above the circulation desk. That's when she walked in. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. She just belonged in the space, as if the quiet bent itself around her. She looked to be in her early 40s, maybe 42, with that kind of beauty that doesn't demand to be noticed, it invites you to slow down. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands catching the late sunlight seeping through the window. She wore a cream blouse, simple yet elegant, and carried herself with a grace that didn't come from trying, it came from knowing who she was. She moved toward the fiction shelves, her fingertips tracing along the spines of books like she was greeting old friends. There was something mesmerizing about the small gestures, the way she tilted her head while reading a blurb, how she smiled faintly when she found something she liked. I tried not to stare. But there's a certain kind of person who carries quietness like perfume, subtle but unforgettable. She was that. When I finally gathered enough courage to ask if she needed help, she looked up, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. Her gaze wasn't piercing, it was gentle, steady, as if she'd been waiting for someone to speak, not out of need but out of curiosity. "I'm just looking," she said softly, her voice low and composed, yet warm in a way that lingered. "Of course," I replied, pretending to rearrange the nearest shelf, though my hands had gone still. She found a book, The Secret Garden, of all things, and sat by the window, the same corner I often used during lunch breaks. The light hit her face just right, casting a golden line across her cheekbone. I caught myself wondering what kind of stories she loved, what kind of quiet she searched for in them. A few minutes later, a child asked her for help with a puzzle book. She wasn't even staff, but she smiled and bent down to help anyway. That image stayed with me, her patience, her ease, her warmth. It wasn't just kindness. It was grace in motion. When she finally stood to leave, she returned the book to the shelf, but paused near the exit. "Thank you," she said, though I hadn't really done anything worth thanking. Still, her words felt deliberate, like a bookmark placed gently in a story I didn't know I was part of yet. That night, I couldn't explain why I kept replaying the moment, the sound of her voice, the calm in her smile. I didn't know her name yet, but somehow, she had already changed the way silence felt. It had been a week since I last saw her, though I'd never admit how often I'd thought about that brief meeting. Every afternoon at the library felt a little incomplete, like a melody missing its final note. Then, one Friday, just as the sky began to gray with the promise of rain, she walked in again. She looked the same, effortlessly calm, unhurried. This time, she carried a small canvas tote bag and a folded cardigan over one arm. She greeted the librarian with a polite nod, then drifted toward the shelves near where I was sorting donations. I tried not to make it obvious that I noticed, but it was impossible not to. Outside, thunder rolled softly, and the first drops began to tap against the wide windows. I caught her glancing toward the sky, her brows creasing. She didn't have an umbrella. I could have ignored it. Maybe I should have. But something in me, instinct or longing or plain decency, made me step forward. "Looks like it's going to pour," I said, a little too casually. She smiled, a half curve of her lips that reached her eyes. "It always does when I forget my umbrella." I laughed, relieved that she didn't seem to mind my intrusion. "I have one. If you don't mind sharing?" Her expression softened, then hesitated, a pause that said she was thinking about how it might look. But then the rain came harder, drumming on the roof in a sudden downpour. She looked out at the drenched street, then back at me. "All right," she said finally, with that same quiet grace. "Thank you." We stood by the door for a moment before stepping into the rain together, both of us under my small, slightly crooked umbrella. The world outside was hushed, soaked in silver light. Water pooled in the cracks of the pavement. Her shoulder brushed mine, and even through the thin fabric of my shirt, I could feel the warmth of her presence. We walked slowly, the umbrella barely wide enough for two. I could smell her perfume, faint and floral, like jasmine after a storm. She spoke softly about the book she'd borrowed, a collection of essays on finding joy in solitude. I listened more to her voice than her words. At one point, her hand brushed mine, not by intention, but by the natural closeness of two people trying to stay dry under too small a shelter. She started to pull away, murmuring a quiet apology, but I shook my head with a smile. It's okay. For the rest of the walk, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full of awareness. When we reached her car, she turned to me. "You're very kind," she said. I wanted to tell her it wasn't kindness. That it was something else entirely, something I didn't yet understand. But I just nodded. As she drove off, the rain still falling in fine silver sheets, I stood there with the umbrella in my hand and my heart unsteady in my chest. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something real. Something that began quietly, beneath the sound of rain and a shared umbrella. The rain had passed, but the air still carried the faint scent of it, damp earth and something softer, like renewal. The library was almost empty that evening, lit only by warm yellow lamps. The kind of light that makes every moment feel slower, more meaningful. She was there again. I'd begun to notice her small habits, how she always paused by the same shelf of travel essays, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when deep in thought, how her smile came not from her lips, but from her eyes. That evening, she lingered longer than usual. I was helping the staff reorganize a stack of old books, dusted and worn from time. When she noticed me struggling with an uneven pile, she stood, set her own book aside, and quietly began to help. We didn't say much. Our hands brushed over the same covers once or twice, and each accidental touch carried the weight of unspoken awareness. When the work was done, I wiped my palms on my jeans, a little nervous without knowing why. "Thank you," I said, glancing at her. She smiled faintly. "You're welcome. You always take care of this place like it's yours." Her words caught me off guard, the way she saw me. Not as a helper or a boy with a task, but as someone who cared. I chuckled lightly, trying to hide the warmth that spread in my chest. "I just like keeping things in order." There was a pause. She looked at me, not with curiosity, but with recognition. As if she'd finally understood something about me that I hadn't yet realized myself. And then it happened. I was about to leave when she reached forward, almost without thinking, and gently adjusted the collar of my shirt. A small gesture, ordinary, almost maternal, but her fingers lingered for half a second too long. Her touch was light, but it carried something that went deeper than words. For that moment, everything else disappeared, the faint buzz of the ceiling lights, the sound of pages turning, even the ticking of the wall clock. All that remained was the warmth of her fingertips brushing my skin and the silence between us that suddenly meant everything. When she pulled her hand back, she seemed startled by her own action. "Sorry," she murmured, eyes lowering. "Your collar, it was." I shook my head gently, voice quiet. "No, it's okay." She smiled then, a small, uncertain smile, and turned back to her books. I walked out, but my steps felt heavier, like I'd just crossed into a part of my own heart I hadn't known existed. That night, lying awake, I kept thinking about that single, fleeting touch. It wasn't romantic in the usual sense, no confession, no embrace, yet it carried an intimacy that undid me completely. It was that one small gesture, simple, human, and unplanned, that changed the way I saw her, and the way I saw everything. The days that followed felt different, quieter, but not in the comforting way they used to be. It was as if the air between us had shifted that evening, after that small, accidental gesture. What once felt natural now carried a fragile weight, a carefulness neither of us had the courage to name. I still went to the library at the same hours, but part of me hesitated at the door every time. Would she be there? And if she was, would she look at me the same way again? The first few times I saw her after that, everything felt subtly off. She still smiled, but there was a hesitation in it, a softness tinted with self-awareness. I noticed how she kept her distance, physically, emotionally, perhaps afraid that others might notice the quiet current between us. She spoke less. The casual conversations about books, travel, and favorite authors became shorter, safer. When I passed by, she would pretend to be focused on her reading, And I would do the same, pretending not to look, but always noticing her anyway. It was in those silences that I realized how much I missed the ordinary. The comfortable rhythm we once had, small smiles, shared glances, the quiet companionship of being near each other without explanation. But something unspoken now hung between us. One evening, I caught her leaving early. She waved, briefly, and I returned the gesture, though neither of us spoke. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway, and the emptiness that followed felt heavier than the quiet itself. I tried convincing myself that I was imagining it, that I'd overread a simple act of kindness. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Her touch that night had meant something. It wasn't just the collar she'd fixed, it was the care in the gesture, the hesitation that followed, the way her breath caught when she realized what she'd done. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe she was afraid of what it meant. And, truthfully, so was I. There were moments when our eyes would meet across the room, brief, charged, and quickly broken. Each glance was a question neither of us dared to ask. Sometimes she would smile faintly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. It was the smile of someone protecting herself from her own heart. In those days, I began to understand how silence could be both beautiful and cruel. It held everything we felt but couldn't speak: longing, guilt, tenderness, fear. I missed her laugh. I missed the way her voice softened when she said my name. But most of all, I missed the ease, the simplicity of not having to think about what each look meant. The distance between us wasn't made of space or time, it was made of restraint. And though I didn't know it yet, that silence was preparing us for something even deeper, a truth that could no longer stay hidden beneath the quiet. That evening felt heavier than usual. The air inside the library carried a stillness that wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. She was there, seated by the same window where I'd first seen her, but she wasn't reading. Her hands rested on an unopened book, her gaze lost in thought. There was something fragile in the way she sat, as if she'd been holding her breath for days. I'd promised myself I wouldn't make things complicated, that I'd give her the space she seemed to need. But watching her sit there in silence, I realized I'd already failed at pretending not to care. When the last few visitors left and the librarian turned off the main lights, I found myself walking toward her without really deciding to. "Hey," I said quietly. My voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. She looked up, surprised, then smiled, faintly, cautiously. "Hi. I didn't mean to bother you," I added, though we both knew I did. She shook her head. "You're not bothering me." The soft hum of the air conditioner filled the silence between us. A few lamps near the back still glowed, throwing gentle shadows across the floor. The world outside the windows was a dark blur, rain threatening again, the sky deepening into indigo. I hesitated. Words felt too blunt for what I needed to say. "I feel like something changed between us." Her eyes lifted to mine, steady but uncertain. "It did," she said after a pause. "And I don't know what to do with that." There was honesty in her tone, not resistance, not denial, just fear. The kind that comes from recognizing something real when you didn't expect it. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable," I said. "But that night, I stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. When I fixed your collar," she said softly. "Yes, I know." She folded her hands in her lap. It was such a small thing. But the moment I did it, I felt. She took a breath, searching for the right word. "Exposed. Like you'd seen more of me than I meant to show." Her voice trembled, barely noticeable, but it made my chest tighten. "I didn't see anything I wasn't supposed to," I said gently. "I just saw you. Maybe for the first time." Her eyes softened, not in pity, but in understanding. "You're young," she said quietly. "You see things as beginnings. I see them as risks." I smiled sadly. Maybe they're both the same thing. We sat there, neither moving, letting the silence settle again. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was real. For the first time since that night, we weren't pretending. We were just two people caught between what we felt and what we feared. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know where this is going. I just know it means something." I nodded. "That's enough." Outside, the rain began to fall softly, steady, rhythmic, forgiving. And in that quiet, under the dim glow of the library lamps, We found something gentler than confession, understanding. By the time the community event came around, a small book fair organized by the library, a quiet rhythm had returned between us. We spoke when needed, shared smiles when no one was looking, and pretended not to notice how naturally we still gravitated toward each other's presence. It wasn't like before, it was gentler now, more cautious, but also more honest. Every glance felt deliberate, and every silence mutual. We'd stopped avoiding what we felt. We simply learned how to carry it. That afternoon, the library was filled with people. Tables of books lined the aisles, volunteers moved about, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She was helping an elderly visitor find a novel, her laughter light but restrained. From across the room, I watched her, the way her kindness unfolded effortlessly, the way she leaned in to listen. For a moment, it was as if time slowed, the noise fading until all I could hear was the steady thump of my own heartbeat. She looked up then, maybe sensing my gaze, and our eyes met across the crowd. There was no surprise in hers, only quiet knowing. A question and an answer, all in one look. Later, when the event ended and the last of the guests had gone, I found her near the window, stacking leftover brochures into neat piles. The late sunlight painted soft gold over her hair. "Long day," I said, approaching. She smiled. "But a good one." I hesitated, hands in my pockets, unsure how to begin. "You've been distant," I said finally. "Not cold. Just careful." She exhaled softly, not denying it. "I have to be. You know that." "I do," I said. "But I don't want to spend the rest of my life pretending something isn't real just because it's inconvenient." She looked up sharply, not angry, but startled by the weight of my honesty. "Do you think this is easy for me?" she asked quietly. "Every time you walk into the room, I have to remind myself to keep breathing normally." The confession was so raw it stilled me. The library around us seemed to fade into shadow and warmth. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, steady, resolute. "We can't be what people expect us to be. But maybe we can be what's true." I took a step closer. For the first time, I didn't stop myself. I reached out, gently taking her hand. She didn't pull away. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft. "For seeing me, even when you shouldn't have." Her fingers tightened slightly around mine. "And you for reminding me I still can." No declarations followed. No promises. Just that simple, wordless understanding that some connections aren't meant to be defined, only lived, quietly, with courage. When she finally let go, the warmth of her hand lingered like a heartbeat I could still feel. And in that moment, under the soft, fading light, I realized love didn't always need a future. Sometimes, it was enough just to exist honestly in the present. It's strange how certain moments refuse to fade. Time moves on, the seasons change, faces come and go, yet one memory stays as vivid as the day it happened. The evening light in the library, the scent of rain on her blouse, and the way her fingers brushed my collar with such simple care. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even love in the way people like to define it, with confessions and promises and shared futures. It was something quieter. Something that grew in silence, fed by small kindnesses and the honesty of two people who simply saw each other when no one else did. Months have passed since the last time I saw her. The library still stands, though it feels emptier now. Sometimes, when I visit, I still half expect to find her there, seated by the window, a half-open book resting on her lap, her eyes lost somewhere between the pages and her thoughts. But she's gone. Not in a tragic way, just in the natural rhythm of life. She moved to another city for work, left behind a note for the staff, nothing more. Not even a goodbye for me. Maybe that was her way of protecting what we had, keeping it untouched, unspoiled by endings. And yet, I never felt abandoned. If anything, I felt honored to have known her, to have been changed by something so subtle yet so complete. That small gesture, her hand adjusting my collar, became the point around which everything shifted. It taught me that affection doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. Sometimes love is a quiet, fleeting touch that leaves an imprint deeper than a lifetime of words. She once told me that I saw everything as beginnings, while she saw them as risks. But now I understand, a beginning and a risk are the same thing. You can't have one without the other. When I think of her now, I don't think of what might have been. I think of how her presence softened the edges of my life. How she made me more patient. How she taught me to listen not just to words, but to silence, to the pauses that hold what hearts can't say aloud. Sometimes, when I catch the faint scent of rain on the air, or when I see someone fix another's collar, I smile without meaning to, because I remember her not as someone I lost, but as someone who taught me how to see. That one small gesture changed everything, not just how I saw her, but how I saw kindness, attention, and love itself. She remains, not as a ghost or a regret, but as a quiet truth I carry with me, that even the briefest connection, when honest and tender, can alter the course of a life. And though we walked separate paths, in some quiet way, we'll always exist in that golden light, two souls who found meaning in a moment and left the rest to memory.